Hi guys, this is the fourth part of my full stack Elixir series. In the last video we have set up Apollo client to fetch to-do items via GraphQL, and we have applied some styling to make the to-do lists look a bit like iCloud reminders, if you squint. And right now the application is doing great at displaying the to-do items, but it's still immutable, so it is probably not the best solution for most use cases. In this video, I would like to cover toggling and updating to the items on the front end. And if we manage, maybe in the next video, we can do create to the item and we will thus finish the application. So let's get our hands dirty. So when I go back to the application and open the to-do list in here in Vim, so right now in this component, we iterate over to the items and render all these to the items as list items inside an unordered list. And this is good enough for displaying them, but it's not good enough if we want to actually do something about them. So the way I think it could be solved is by rendering all of them as new components, and I will call it to-do list item. And the extension is TSX because we are using TypeScript with JSX. And inside this file, I import React from React. And if we think of it, we actually won't need any props that don't come with the to-do item itself. So back in this file, there is an interface to the item that we have already defined. And I will now move this interface to a separate file. And I call it to-do item.ts. And for now, let's just move this interface inside this file and export it. And inside this file, I import the same to-do item interface from .types to the item. We have an interface that we can use in both the to-do list and the to-do list item component. And in here, in to-do list item.tsx, I define this new component, const to-do list item equals. And we will get ID, content, and is completed. And it is typed as to-do item. And we have to import this file before we can actually use the interface. And inside this function, let's return maybe a div, and we call it class name equals to-do item, and let's close it. And right now, if we look at the way it is implemented in here, this circle on the left side of the to-do list item is not even an element in itself, it's just a pseudo element in before. And this is good enough for displaying, but this won't be clickable. So I will try to re-implement this thing as a button. And I'll call it button class name equals to-do item __ toggle, and it is self-closing. And in here, maybe I'll do first a P and just display the content of this to-do item. And this should be enough for now. And is completed is never used right now. So maybe for this, I will wrap it in the curly braces, and when the to-do list item is completed, then I will add a separate class called to-do item toggle completed. And if it's not completed, then I don't add anything. And close the curly brace, and now it shouldn't be complaining at all. And the ID we will use in a moment. So now I will this away, and I recreate it as a to-do list, and this will be a div, and I close the div, and inside this I will still have to iterate over all these items. And in here I pass a function item, and I will render every one of them as a to-do list item, and I just pass the whole item. This way this item will be passed as is, and the only thing we still have to add is the key. And this key has to be unique, so I basically pass the unique ID. And if we go back to the browser, we see that right now it is actually rendering without end, but it doesn't look the way we wanted. So when you go back to the to-do list SAS file, you can kind of reuse some of this. So I have just renamed to-do list item to the item, and the before will be equivalent to to-do item __ toggle, and this should look similar, and it does indeed look similar. So the only thing that is still doesn't look exactly the way we wanted is that these are rendered as P as paragraphs, and paragraphs have margins by default. So let's to-do list item. Okay, this is not, I didn't even give it a class. Okay, let me add a class. Class name equals to-do item content. And it looks kind of similar-ish. And let me think. Okay, I'll give it so right now it's margin 0 on the top, and it will be 0 on the right side, and 0 on the bottom, and maybe 3 rem on the left. And the toggle should still be on the left. I will move the border to the item content. This way this border will move in here, and the to the item toggle should be in here. I move it to the right, and right now we have this button, and we can actually focus it, but it doesn't work when you click it. So this will be the next thing we will do, and right now we will use a mutation. And we import Apollo React hooks. From Apollo React hooks, we import use mutation, and let's define a mutation. And if you remember, in the playground we have defined some mutations before, and let's try to do it once again. We'll need an ID, and this would be a non-nullable ID. And inside it we toggle to the item with the ID of ID, and we fetch the ID and is completed. And right now it doesn't work because we didn't pass it any variables, but if let's see what the queries are right now. Well, let's see what the items are right now. Okay, let me open it here in the to-do list dev database, we have items number 7 and 8. So let me toggle to the number 7. And right now it is marked as completed. And if you go to the reason I fetch ID and is completed is because in the Apollo client, the client is caching all data on the front end. And if you do any mutations, it won't automatically update it unless you fetch the ID and and the columns that you want to be updated. So if from this mutation we fetch the ID and is completed, then this will update exactly is completed of the to the item we have just updated. And this is all defined somewhere in here in mutations. Let's just copy this mutation over to the new component. Const toggle item equals GQL. Oops, we have to fetch it as well. And just paste it in here. The way mutations work with Apollo React hooks is that you use the hook called useMutation, and it will return an array, and the first element will be a mutating function. So toggle item, okay, maybe I call it to the toggle to the item, and in here I call use mutation hook with the toggle to the item mutation. And this in order for this mutation to work, we will have to pass it a variable, the variable ID, and I don't want to do it in here because it will make the button code too long, so I will use callback, which is a React hook handle toggle equals use callback, and I pass it a function toggle item with variables and with the variables ID, and we pass it ID and toggle item, and this will be a complete function that we can just pass to button. So let's say on click equals handle toggle, and if you go back in here, it still renders. So let's see if anything actually happens when I click it. So when you see when I click on this, there is an API mutation is called, and we now see that to the item with number 7 is not completed anymore. And if I do it again, then it's toggled just as well. So right now these are not being rendered in any different way, but actually if we go back to iCloud, we see that if you click it, it shows as a colored circle, and inside it there is another white circle. So we already have classes that are being applied if a toggle is completed. So let me do some styling in these CSS files. So this is the class we want to select, and inside it I will add an after element. And okay, what I see here is that some of these can be used because it's to the item. This to the item toggle is not a pseudo element anymore, and this will be a pseudo element, and I think it's around 1 pixel from the border, so we don't have to specify the height and width of this element, so we can just pass top 1 pixel, left 1 pixel, right 1 pixel, and bottom 1 pixel. And this is a white circle, so it will be border. I will give it border of 2 pixels, and solid and white. and the to the item itself should have the same color as in here. So maybe for now we could just copy and paste it, or I could store this as a custom property, and this might be a bit more dry for now. So it's primary, and in here I swap this for a var, and for now let's just do it like this, and here I give it a background of var dash primary. Okay. And what did just happen? Okay, I see. This still needs position absolute to work. And right now it works quite nice, except that it's not rounded. I'll just copy this over to here. And now it looks almost good. Maybe I'll make it a bit smaller, so the border is 1 pixel instead of 2. And let's just assume it works for now. If you look precisely, you see that when this is focused, it has a square outline, and I don't like it. So maybe on focus, I will set outline none. And let's see if it works. I think it does. And this looks nice. Another thing we wanted to do is editing these, and if you look at iCloud reminders, you can just click anywhere inside it, and once you blur the item, it gets saved. And we could do something similar in here. And I was thinking about it, and I think the easiest way to do it is just swap this p element, this paragraph, for an input, and most of the time it should work just fine. So in the to-do list item, I will rename it to input, and with the rest I can just leave everything as is. Okay, I see that the input cannot have children, so that was my fault. Input value equals content, and this will be a self-closing tag. Okay, and it looks similar-ish. And well, in the to-do list SAS, let's try to style it a bit. So right now we see that these to-do items, they have the default font, the default width, and they don't have a border anymore. So let me fix it. So for example, I will remove the whole border by default, and let me remove the outline, and font should be inherited, and the width is 100%. And right now it looks almost exactly the same way it looked before, and these are now clickable. And well, the only thing is that as you know, React inputs, they don't work exactly the same as they work outside of React if they're not controlled. We will need to implement a callback to handle the changes. So for this I will use state, as in use state, and there is this hook called use state, and I'll just do it like this. Const text equals set text. This is similar to This hook is similar to useMutation in that it returns an array, and we can destructure the array kind of like we do in Elixir. The first element is the current value of the state, and the second function is a function that we can use to set the value. And useState only takes one argument, and this is the initial value of the state, which in our case is content. And down here I will swap the content for text, because this is this way it can be controlled, and I will give it an onChange callback, and I can just call it use callback, and it will the callback will get a change event, and this can be imported from React, and this is a generic interface, so I will pass it an HTML input element, and inside it we can get the value from event target, and we can set it using the setText function. And the function useCallback also accepts an array of dependencies, and in this case there are no dependencies except for setText. And this onChange handler I pass to this input, so onChange equals onChange. And when you go back to the browser, these should be editable. And the only thing we have to do right now is that after we edit these items, we should save them. And well, there will be another mutation, and let me write another mutation update to-do item, and this accepts an ID, and the ID is a non-nullable ID. The new content will be a non-nullable string, and inside it we still haven't implemented any mutation to actually toggle it to the item, and this may be an issue, so let me go and quickly write a mutation for this. So in the GraphQL schema I will write a new mutation and I call it update to the item, and it accepts an argument of ID, which is a non-nullable ID, and it accepts the new content, which is a non-nullable string. And to resolve it, I will pattern match on the ID and pattern match on the content. And there is a second argument that we can ignore, and in here a to-dos update item, and we need to fetch the to-do by to-dos get item by ID, and we update the item with the new content. So right now I will refresh the browser, and if we look at the schema, we see that there is an update to the item mutation, and let's see if it works. We have items 7 and 8, and I pass the ID to the mutation, and I pass the content to the mutation. And due to the fact that we will be updating ID and content, I need to also fetch the ID and content from the result, and I pass it two variables, and the first one will be the ID, and this will be 7 or 8, and the new content will be update a to-do item, and I run the mutation, and we see that it worked. And we can also see in the database logs that the item has been updated. So if I refresh the page, we see that the item has been updated, and this looks good. So let me copy this mutation straight back into the to-do list item, and I call it const update to-do item, and in here I will use the use mutation hook again, and this time I pass it the new mutation I have just defined. And basically the way HTML inputs work is that once we focus on the input, we have the onFocus event, and when we leave it, for example, when I hit the tab key and go to the next field, or when we click somewhere else, or maybe we press escape, there is another event called blur, and this is the event I'm planning to use in this case. I will write another callback and call it onBlur, and here I also use callback, and I pass it an arrow function, and in this arrow function I will call the update item mutation with the variables ID, which is unchanged, and the content will be the text, which is the value of our current state. The dependencies will be text and update item, and in here I just pass the onBlur callback to the item, to the input. And when you go back to the browser and see at the logs, so here there is the toggle, and when I try to update it, there was another on the blur event, the mutation has been fired and the item gets updated, which looks nice. And as we see, it also gets persisted over the next call. So in today's video we have implemented toggling and updating to the items, and I think this concludes this video. In the next part I would like to cover creating new items and deleting items that we don't need anymore. Then our to-do application will be mostly complete and we can go on to more interesting subjects. So, as some of you already know, in the next tutorial I'm planning to build a clone of the ordering system at McDonald's. With a vending machine and a screen showing you that your cheeseburger is ready. And if you enjoyed this video and you would like to build this application with me, please like and subscribe. And if you didn't, please let me know how I can improve. Thank you and goodbye.